Welcome to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt. On the radio, on podcasts everywhere, on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and on talklawradio.com. Each episode, I like to talk about some aspect of Texas or federal law or regulation that needs some explaining. Do you have a question about the law? If you do, email me at host@talklawradio.com or post a comment on Facebook. Now it's time for you to discover your legal issue blind spots by listening to me talk about the law on the radio. Today is going to be a great show, Shannon.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Today we're thrilled to have Dr. Andrew Zimbalist,
Zimbalist.
Zimbalist,
Te lo dije.
a renowned economist, and the Robert A. Woods Professor of Economics at Smith College, where he taught since 1974, with a Bachelor of Arts degree from University of Wisconsin-Madison and a Master of Arts and a PhD from Harvard University.
And he's bilingual.
Yes. Yeah, we got to hear a couple of lines
It's
from him
beautiful.
before.
The accent is beautiful.
He's a leading expert in sports economics, has consulted for major organizations, testified before Congress, and has authored works too numerous to list, including the book Sports, Jobs, and Taxes. Today's hidden legal issue blind spots are how a city's decision to build a new stadium or arena affects the city residents,
Right.
whether there are positive economic benefits like jobs and profit, as well as whether there are non-economic benefits to the city residents. Welcome to the show, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So with us is Shannon, Roberta, San Antonio, Salomon Haas.
How would you say Roberta?
Roberta.
That's way better than even you, Shannon. So let's hear from you, Doctor. How did you end up becoming such an expert on sports, jobs, and taxes?
Well, I began my career as an economist, mostly doing international economics and Latin American economic development. And in 1990, I was putting my then 11-year-old son to bed in the middle of March, one night in the middle of March. And he said to me out of the blue, after talking about his Little League team all winter long and looking at his walls, which were plastered with baseball cards, he said to me, "Dad, I don't think I'm going to play Little League this summer." And I practically fell out of bed, but I composed myself and I said, "Oh, really, Jeff? How come?" And he said, "Well, the major leaguers aren't playing, so I figured I won't be able to play either." The major leaguers were being locked out of spring training by the owners. They had a collective bargaining dispute. I didn't know anything about the economics of baseball at the time, but I did know that that wasn't true. So I reassured Jeff that it would be fine. And then he said to me, well, Dad, you're an economist and you like baseball and you just finished your book on Panama. Why don't you write a book on the economics of baseball?
So
No
we
kidding.
did.
I figured that it's not every day that an 11-year-old tells his father what to do with his life. So I looked into it and I ended up writing a book proposal. I sent it to an outfit called Basic Books, which is between a popular and an academic publishing house. I never expected to hear from them because I had no background in the subject, but they liked what I proposed and they called me up a few weeks later and said, "We love your proposal. We'll give you $30,000 advance, write the book." The book then became a business bestseller, and I started getting asked to consult and write and do more research in the sports area. And it was a lot of fun. So I followed my nose and became a sports economist.
You could buy a house in 1990 for $30,000. A nice one.
That's awesome. I'm so glad that Jeff led you down that path.
Yeah. Have you thanked him? Did you dedicate the book to him?
Of course. But I haven't given him any of my earnings because he doesn't need my money. He's a very successful filmmaker, producer.
Oh, yes,
director.
yes.
Good. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
I think we both had a great deal of good fortune.
Awesome. I want to talk about the costs and funding of building arenas and stadiums. And so my first question is, how do municipalities typically get their funds?
To finance sports arenas and stadiums?
Yes, sir.
Well, the most common method is to issue a bond. Usually it's a long-term bond because you're building a stadium or an arena that's going to last 30 or more years, and you want to pay it back slowly over time. So usually you're issuing a long-term bond, and sometimes those bonds benefit from being tax exempt, or the interest benefits from being tax exempt, and sometimes they don't. The argument that's often made by the municipalities that go along with this idea is that it will bring certain economic benefits. That yes, it'll be a cost maybe. But these days, used to, when I started doing work in this area, it used to cost $100 million to build a stadium or an arena. And now, of course, they can be several $billion. The most expensive one being SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California, just outside of LA. That costs $5 billion to
Wow.
build. But the argument is, yes, the city is going to have to put out money, but the construction of the stadium or the arena will generate a lot of jobs. The jobs generate income. The income generates more demand, and it will end up being a boost to the economy. Economists who have studied this matter have found a very different outcome, which is that they don't promote local economic. The stadiums, as a rule, do not promote local economic development. They do not promote employment. They do not promote increases in the standard of living or average income in the community.
Well, I'd like to ask some more specific questions about funding, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Some municipalities claim that city residents won't pay increased taxes to fund the building. Is the bond that you mentioned that some municipalities use, is that a tax or is that something else?
So when the city issues a bond, it's basically borrowing money, right? And it has to pay the bondholders interest. That's what induces the bondholders to loan the city the money. It also, of course, eventually, if it's a 30-year bond, when the 30 years are up, they have to pay back the principal of the bond as well. Now, if it were the case that the city was making an investment in a facility that actually improved the local economy, then there would be increased income, and the tax money that came from that increased income could then be used to pay the debt service on the bond. If, however, it's the case that it doesn't help the local economy and maybe potentially even hurts the local economy, then there is no additional tax money. And the city either has to divert tax money that would otherwise go to other purposes, infrastructure, schools, you name it, police, money that would otherwise go to those activities has to be pulled away from those activities to finance the bond. Or it could lead the city to increase taxes to generate enough money to pay off the bond.
Or to pay for those other things that got diverted, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Another question, Shannon, is have you ever heard of the city needing approval from voters to increase hotel occupancy tax?
Well, sometimes there's a plebiscite or a referendum that goes to the voters. Usually the proponents of a stadium, and those proponents will typically be, of course, the team owner, right? They'll typically be local development and construction companies that will get large contracts to build the stadium, and a few other groups. Those groups form a coalition, a pro-stadium coalition, and they will try to move the political process forward without having a referendum or without having a plebiscite, letting the local population vote. And I think Rudy Giuliani, the ex-mayor of New York, explained very well why they don't want there to be a referendum. Rudy Giuliani's argument, he was trying to get public money to build the new Yankee Stadium in Manhattan. His argument was the people are too stupid to know what's good for them. But the real reason, of course, is that usually it's easier to control a city council or county commissioner than it is to control the entire voting population around questions like this. So yes, sometimes the citizens are called upon to vote. Roughly half the time, the referendums lead to an approval, and roughly half the time they lead to a defeat.
And you've probably seen some of both
Sure, I've seen both of those
or,
things
or
happen.
studied them in writing your books. I just want to remind everybody that this is special guest Dr. Andrew Zimbalist, a leading expert in sports economics who wrote the book called Sports, Jobs, and Taxes. And we're talking about how a city might finance a sports arena or sports stadium. And we've just been talking about the funding so far. Another idea that I've seen proposed is that the stadium is just going to be part of a larger redevelopment of the downtown area, and part of the downtown area is city-owned buildings, and so some of the money to finance the project is going to come from businesses that lease those buildings. Have you ever heard of that?
Sure. This is an idea that maybe has gained currency over the last 20 years. The idea is that if you're building an arena, the arena itself will take up 7, 8, 9, 10 acres depending on its design. Plus, you need, of course, surrounding parking lots and so on. And so maybe you need 20 acres of land. If you're building a football stadium or a baseball stadium, which of course is much larger capacity, then you'll need more land. If a football stadium, you need massive amounts of parking for tailgating. So the general idea is this: that rather than tell the citizens that you're going to have to pay taxes to do the debt service, what they propose instead is that they go into a partnership, a public-private partnership between the team owner and the city, and they set aside a bunch of this land, whether it's 5 acres, 10 acres, 20, 30 acres, whatever it might be. They set it aside for a mixed-use development project. Mixed-use development could be residential properties, apartment buildings, for instance. It could be restaurants. It could be other retail. It could be commercial buildings. It could be sports-themed activities. But you have a picture of around the arena, or around the stadium, is going to be new development. And that new development will have economic activity. The economic activity will generate sales taxes, will generate property taxes. You use the money from that activity then to pay off the bonds. So that's a nice idea. It makes it sound like there's no cost to the taxpayer, to the residents.
Right.
There'd be new money generated by this development. So yes, if it works out just as I described it, maybe it would be something that could be economically neutral, or maybe even a little bit positive. Usually it doesn't work out that way. The reason it doesn't work out
Well, let's
Yeah.
save the reason for why it doesn't work out until after the break. We got to take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt. We're talking about the law and municipalities and how they propose to fund sports arenas and stadiums with Dr. Andrew Zimbalist, a leading expert in sports economics, and wrote the book Sports, Jobs, and Taxes. This is, I heard one review was, this is an essential read for a city resident whose city government is proposing to pay for the building of a new stadium.
Wow.
So you can borrow this after I'm done.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shannon, what do you think about the Spurs and building a new stadium for them? We already have 2 other stadiums.
Well, I think a lot of people, I think the mayor's getting a lot of good press right now. People are really reacting. I always like to do an informal poll, and it feels like people really respond well to that. The perception is that she's fighting for the people. She wants more transparency. But I have a question for you. What if her legacy is she's the reason that we lose the Spurs? That
Well, spoiler alert, that's one of my questions
Oh, okay.
for Dr.
I didn't mean to
Zimbalist.
take your question. And I want to know about football, if we're getting football or not. And I also want you to feel my pain with me that I had an emotional reaction when I see that skeleton of a building and the site when they.
The
I mean,
Institute of Texan Cultures.
I have a very emotional reaction when I drive past there.
Well, there's
It
a
just
lot.
looks wrong.
There's a lot of sports fans here in San Antonio, and
Right.
and they don't want the Spurs to leave. So I want to talk about the psychology of that, but first I want to allow Dr. Zimbalist to finish his thought about why the leasing of city property as part of a larger project sometimes doesn't work out with a net economic benefit.
Okay, so very often you see these very elaborate and pretty plans for mixed-use development. And on the basis of the plan and the potential tax revenue that it would generate, the city goes ahead and says, green lights the project. They issue a bond, and the bond requires debt service. If the plan does not actually produce the investments that the plan calls for, like maybe there are no hotel companies that want to put a hotel there, maybe there are no restaurants who want to put a restaurant there, and so on. If those potential investments don't materialize, then the revenue that they were supposed to generate isn't going to materialize either, and the city is left holding the bag on the debt service. So that's one issue that often happens. Another issue that often happens is that the city will provide fiscal incentives to get businesses to move into the area. And very often the businesses that move into the area adjacent to the stadium or the arena are businesses that already exist in another part of the city, maybe 5 blocks away, maybe 10 or 15 blocks away. And so what really is happening is that some company is moving from Avenue X to Avenue Z, but they're still doing the same thing they did before. They're just doing it now next to the stadium, whereas before they did it on another part of the city. So what does that mean in terms of the generation of tax revenue? It means that there is no net increment to tax revenue.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same activity. It's just relocated to another part of the city. So those are 2 things that you have to look out for. Now, you also mentioned hotel taxes as a way to finance this.
Mm-hmm.
Hotel taxes and automobile taxes, automobile rental taxes, both sound like you're levying the tax on foreigners or on visitors. So
Right.
The residents themselves don't have to pay. Nobody's going to raise their property tax. Nobody's going to raise their income tax or whatever. It's the foreigners or the outsiders who come stay in the hotel and rent cars, they'll be paying. Well, the reason, and that's a typical plan. The reason why that plan doesn't usually work out is because if it were possible to raise your hotel taxes and not discourage people from coming to the city, which is what these plans often propose,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
raise the hotel tax. If it doesn't discourage people from coming to the city, you can raise the hotel tax anyway and use that money not to build a stadium, but to improve your schools or
Mm-hmm.
to improve your security or to improve your infrastructure or whatever. So the idea that this is a free good because it's a hotel tax on outsiders doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's the same thing with car rental. If you could increase your car rental prices, taxes on car rentals without discouraging rentals of cars, then again, you could take that revenue and use it for any public purpose, not necessarily for building a stadium. So in either case, the notion that this is a free good because you're making outsiders pay for it doesn't make any sense.
And I think I read a chapter in your book about that, about how some people will decide not to come here for their convention because it's too expensive. You know, if they can go to another city and have their convention over there, they might do that just to save a little bit of money.
That's right. I
So
mean,
there's
yeah.
I heard a story about the city of Houston when they were building a football stadium prior to 2004 so that they could have the Super Bowl there. And what I
He
read
knows where you're going.
was that efforts to bring more retail, restaurants, and bars to downtown for the 2004 event failed due to insufficient demand. And many businesses that opened for the Super Bowl closed a few years later.
You know, exactly. And this is particularly problematic with regard to football, less so with basketball. If you build a new basketball arena, it'll depend on who owns the arena and whether there are fiscal incentives that went on and so on and so forth. But the idea about a basketball arena is that if it's well managed, you can use that 200 to 300 days a year because you have basketball and the NBA home team, Peter Holt's team, is going to play 41, 42, 43, 44, depending on whether they're in postseason or not. They're going to play, let's say, 40 to 50 games a year. But then you have the ice capades that come to town. And then you have the rodeo that comes to town. And you have concerts that come to town. It's possible to use an arena that has a cover, right? That has a roof. It's possible to use that 200, 300 days a year. And indeed, if we're talking about an arena like Madison Square Garden in New York City, sometimes it's used twice in the same day. And so you can use it even 400 times a year. But a football stadium, on the other hand, how many times a year does the NFL play football games? 17 games a year. Half of those are at home. So 9 or 8 games, maybe a preseason, maybe a postseason. So we're talking about using a football stadium 10, 12, 14 days a year. Maybe you bring in Taylor Swift for a couple of concerts. Maybe you bring in Bruce Springsteen for a couple. Now we're up to 20. But how many games, how many days are there in the year? I think the number is 365. So if you're a hotel owner, or if you're a restaurant owner, are you going to want to move your restaurant from one part of the city next to the football stadium when the football stadium's only being used 20 days out of the year and it's dark 345 days a year? It's not necessarily an attractive investment. Now, there are special circumstances, of course, that can sometimes apply. But yeah, for the notion, as popular as football is, as the NFL is in the United States, and of course it's even more so in Texas than the rest of the country, as popular as it is, it's not a very good tool for economic development.
So that might answer your question, Shannon, about
Lots of
whether they
them.
would put a football stadium down there. I remember that coming up. They also talked about building a baseball stadium down there for the San Antonio Missions, but I think everybody forgot about it because I haven't seen it on any of the renderings.
I haven't seen that. No.
Let me add, if I could, and I think it's an important caveat, that the actual economic outcome is going to depend a lot on the particular circumstances, and we can go into some of those if you want later on.
Sure.
But one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that more often than not, when you have the San Antonio Spurs in your community, or when you have the Los Angeles Lakers in your community, or take your pick of a sports team, it's something that's enjoyed by the members of the community. It's something that brings community together.
Right.
It unifies. It's something that they share with each other, and people get excited about it together.
Go Spurs.
That's a positive. So
Right.
when I make these critical economic arguments, I'm not saying don't ever do this, don't ever build a stadium, don't ever build an arena with public money. I'm saying when you make your decision to do it, understand that this is not, generally speaking, an engine that's going to promote your economy. It's going to cost you money to do it. But you might very well decide, okay, I'm willing to pay an extra $15 a year in taxes, or whatever the number might be, in order to have my NBA team in town.
Oh, okay, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt with Shannon Roberta Salomon Haas, San Antonio extraordinaire. Follow her on Instagram if you have it. You'll be encouraged and entertained. And we're here with Dr. Andrew Zimbalist, a leading expert in sports economics, and he wrote the book called Sports, Jobs, and Taxes. This is the book you need to have if your municipality is trying to pay for a sports arena or stadium. We've been talking about how typical municipalities pay for a new stadium or arena, and we've been talking about some of the potential economic benefits and some of the downturns. Shannon had a question. What if, go ahead and ask about how San Antonio's special. Oh, that's his phone.
Hold on a second.
Go ahead, Shannon. Ask about
Right.
San Antonio, the special city.
Well, let's wait. Let's wait for.
Well, we can't have dead air on the radio.
Okay. Well, I was talking to you in the break that I've always had this idea that San Antonio was very special. And I don't remember where I quite got this idea. I just think we have a very unique culture. I don't want to be Dallas. I don't want to be Houston. And I love Austin, but we're even different from Austin. We're San Antonio. So we say something around here, puro SA, something is, if you see something and it's something only we would do, like we eat a lot of barbacoa. And so we
Right.
say we're puro SA. Can you talk about the factors that you were talking about? And do you think that my belief is correct that we're somehow special or different? Because you've studied, sounds like almost all the major cities that have done this.
I don't want to pretend that I'm an expert on the San Antonian economy. But what I will say is that I believe it's possible, depending on the terms of the deal, for a well-structured deal to be either economically neutral or economically positive for a city. You need very careful and intelligent negotiators and experienced negotiators to get to that point. And more often than not, it doesn't happen. Most of the time, it doesn't happen. Most of the time,
Wow.
there is an economic cost. But so what are the key issues here? Who owns the arena? If you build the arena, is it going to be owned by the city because the city helped pay for it? Or is it going to be owned by Peter Holt, by the owner of the team? Peter Holt, go ahead.
That brought up a question in my mind. If the city owns the arena and they charge a lease fee for the team, shouldn't that help to keep it viable?
Okay, so one of the things that happens if the city owns the arena, and this is more often than not what happens, is then there's no property tax that's collected on the arena. If the owner of the team owned the arena, it'd be private property and there'd be a property tax. The arena, let's say the arena is built for $1 billion. Times the local property tax.
Yeah, that'd be a lot of money.
And there's a lot of them, it's probably $20 or $30 million a year. Owners of the sports teams usually don't want to own the arena, even if they're helping to finance it, because it means they have to pay property taxes. So if the city owns the arena, then it leases the arena to the owner. Now that lease has a lot of terms in it. One of the terms is what's the rent? Who pays the rent? And how much is it? Very often what happens in these deals is that they're sweetheart deals. And they charge a rent, but it's way below what a market rent would be for that amount of land and that kind of a property that produces the amount of revenue that gets produced by an NBA team. So what's the rent? Who gets to keep when the San Antonio Spurs aren't playing, but it's Taylor Swift giving a concert, and the tickets go between $300 and $3,000, and there's a sales tax on who gets to keep the revenue from that? Does Peter Holt get to keep the revenue, or does the city get to keep the revenue, or is there some other formula that's being applied? That can have a very major impact. So obviously, if you're Peter Holt, what you want is the city to own the arena and then to charge very little rent. And then for all of the non-basketball events that happen, and there might be 200 of them, there can be a lot of events, might be 200 of them. Does Peter Holt get to keep the revenue, or does the city, or does somebody else get to keep the revenue? Then there's a question of maintenance of the arena. The arena gets built, but then has to be maintained. It has to be operated. Who pays for the operational expenses, and who pays for the maintenance expenses? Who pays for the improvement expenses? Very often you'll see in these leases between a city and a team, it says that the facility has to be kept in first-class condition, or the lease, which is usually a 30-year lease, or the lease becomes defunct. It's
Right.
no longer
So
valid.
the city
And
is
so somebody's got to put
responsible.
money into the arena to update it over time.
Upgrades.
And so there are all sorts of issues around the actual deal that's structured between the team and the owner. And those details, the devil is in the details, those details will, at the end of the day, either yield a negative conclusion, economically speaking, for the city, or a neutral, or perhaps to a small degree, a positive. And of course, if you can get it to be neutral or positive, then you get to have the team and all the enjoyment that the team brings to the city,
Right.
basically without a cost. So the negotiation process and the balancing of needs and interests.
Well, I want to bring that up because what makes a strong negotiator is having bargaining power, and so which side has superior bargaining power here?
Right.
Right. And so what's true about the NBA and what's true about the other sports leagues in the United States is that they operate as monopolies. There's only one producer of top-level basketball in the United States. It's the NBA, and same thing with hockey and baseball and so on. So there's one producer. And what do monopolists do that enables them to enjoy higher profits?
They limit the supply.
They cut back supply and then charge higher money for it. And so one of the ways that the sports leagues do that is they restrict the number of franchises. So the NBA has 30 franchises. There are more than 30 cities in the United States that are large enough and economically powerful enough to support an NBA team. So you always have in reserve, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 cities that say, hey, if San Antonio doesn't want to pay for a new arena, we'll build an arena for you. Come to our town. Right. And so that they use that as leverage, and they get to extort more and more favorable deals from the city when they do that.
How about the sharing of ticket sales? Could the city earn revenue that way?
Well, the city will usually, if they're getting revenue from the ticket sales, it's on the sales tax or entertainment sales tax.
Well, why don't the millionaire owners, I'm not just talking about $1 million, they have hundreds of millions of dollars.
Or billions. Yeah.
Right. Why don't they just pay for it?
Well,
because they can get a city to do it, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, this whole process of financing of stadiums and arenas happens in a much different way in Europe. In Europe, they have open sports leagues. And because the leagues are open, you have the phenomenon, and I don't want to get into a lot of detail here, but if you follow the Premier League, if you follow soccer, or what they over there call football, if you follow that, you know that in greater metropolitan area of London, they have 6 teams in the Premier League. 6. They have a total of 20 teams, but 6 of them are in greater London. How many baseball teams are there in San Francisco? Well, there used to be 2 if you count Oakland, but now they're in Sacramento, so there's 1. How many are in California? How many in Los Angeles? There's 1. If you include Anaheim and Orange County, there are 2. How many are there in New York? There are 2. They're the Yankees and the Mets. How many? And so on. So basically in the United States, we have either 1 or 2 teams per city, even the largest cities. But over there, they've got 6. So what impact do you think that has on negotiating around leases or negotiating around building new facilities? The impact is that if the mayor of London gets approached by the owner of Chelsea football team or Tottenham or whatever the team might be, and they say, hey, build me a new arena or I'm leaving, the mayor of London says, adios. Go ahead. I've got 5 other teams. Yeah. I don't need the 6th team. And by the way, if you leave the stadium that's there, somebody else will want to use it because they promote from the bottom leagues on up. So the leverage that you raise, that issue, is very important, and it ends up having a lot to do with whether the city or public funds in general are going to building a private arena or for an arena for the private benefit.
Well, because the fear is that we're going to lose our home team that we have spirit for and
It's possible.
camaraderie amongst each other.
There's a reality there. There's a reality there. And that's why it's important, I think, for citizens to understand both elements of this reality. One element is, if it is building an arena going to actually enliven and enrich the local economy? Is it going to create jobs? Is it going to raise per capita income? The answer there, generally speaking, is almost always no, it won't. But will it save the team? Well, maybe it will. So then what you have to do as a taxpayer is you have to make a calculus, right? You have to say, I'm going to have to pay so much money, and in return, I get to have the team, or get the team to stay. By the way, another bad thing that often happens here is that you're building a new arena, a new fancy arena with more premium seating, with more luxury boxes and club seating. And so the common citizen is helping pay for this, but then they can't afford to go to the arena because the prices are much higher than they've ever been before. But in any event, what you're entitled to know as a taxpayer and as a voter is, okay, here's what we're going to get. We're going to get to keep the Spurs, and here's what it's going to cost. The problem very often is that they're not told it's going to cost anything. And in the case where I understand from what you've said is that the Spurs went out and hired an economic impact study, and it's being done by by a company that's owned by the Spurs.
Right.
And so they're going to produce an economic result that's going to say, this is the cat's meow. This is going to generate a tremendous amount of job and a tremendous amount of income and so on. And that's a falsehood. What we know is that it's not that simple. It doesn't usually work out that way. So the voter has the right to have accurate information when they do the trade-offs, and not be told you get to keep the team and you're going to get much richer.
I want to take one more break, and when we come back, I'd like for you to tell us about one example. Hopefully you can search your mind, a memory of a team that actually had a positive economic impact. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Talk Law Radio. I'm Todd Marquardt, on the radio, on Facebook Live, on YouTube, and on talklawradio.com. So check out YouTube, subscribe to the channel so that you can receive the alert when new episodes are dropped. We're usually talking about the law because in the beginning, God had one law: don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then he gave Moses the 10 Commandments. And now we have municipal, state, and federal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws that might impact you without you knowing it. So I'm here.
They stop when they go watch the Spurs. They eat their popcorn and they stop making new laws for a minute.
We're talking about basketball arenas and baseball stadiums, also football stadiums with Dr. Andrew Zimbalist, who is an economics professor at the Smith College. Is that right, Doctor?
Yeah.
And we've been talking about the costs and the potential benefits and economic benefits to the citizens of a city and non-economic benefits to the citizen. And before the break, I asked the doctor if he could come up with one example when a city had a positive economic benefit from building an arena?
Yeah, I think there are lots of examples. There's the Brooklyn Nets. They moved from the Meadowlands in New Jersey to downtown Brooklyn, or just outside of downtown Brooklyn, a place called Atlantic Square, and they financed the entire construction of the arena, and they're also financing. That is to say, the Nets used to be owned by the Ratner family, Forest City Ratner. They financed entirely privately the construction of the arena, and they're developing a property of land that's 20 some odd acres adjacent to the arena. They're providing the investment to develop it. It's mostly in a residential way. So I think because there's very little public money put into it, a tremendous amount of private money, and it was very well thought out and planned. That's certainly an example. The Braves, Atlanta Braves in Cobb County, recent stadium that was built there about 6 or 7 years ago. The Rams, Los Angeles Rams, and Kroenke, the owner of the Rams, built with private funds, $5 billion SoFi Stadium in Inglewood, California. I think clearly is an economic benefit to Inglewood and the surrounding cities. The Giants, San Francisco Giants, built Pac Bell Park with private money, entirely with private money back in the year 2000. The Patriots built Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts, private money. I think that's also another case. So when you have the team putting up the vast majority of the financing, and when there are ancillary agreements around the lease and around the infrastructure, like stuff that we've referred to already, it's certainly possible for this to happen. I think I just gave you 5 or 6 cases.
Yeah.
And there are others. The thing is that it's not usually the case, and it's certainly not automatically the case, that these things pay out financially. And so the best advice is you need to have people who are well informed and experienced to bring out all of these points and to do proper economic modeling and cost benefit analysis to see how it really works out. And then it's the obligation of the politicians to share the information, not paid for economic impact studies where it's done by a company that happens to be owned by the team that's promoting, but outside independent experts who can give you the information and the analysis you need to understand.
I'm glad you mentioned politicians there. This radio show is sponsored by Marquardt Law Firm, and Marquardt Law Firm focuses on business and estate law, including last wills and living trusts. And the whole issue behind estate planning is legacy. And so I wondered if you had a story to tell about, are the politicians here that are involved in city government, are they worried about their legacy when they're voting to spend all this money on an arena, because they're afraid of the bad legacy that they might have if they're responsible for telling the team to take off?
Right, of course. And let's not only paint with a broad brush here. I mean, politicians usually share certain characteristics with each other, like they're maniacal egoists. That's usually true. But they're
public servants.
Usually, but they're not all the same. Was the next sentence I was going to say. They're not. Yeah. Shouldn't say all politicians are doing the same thing or motivated by the same things. And of course, politicians care about their legacy. But in my view, when politicians think about impact, they're mostly thinking about the next election, and they're thinking about short-term effects. And certainly it's a negative short-term effect if under your watch, Peter Holt took his team somewhere else. That politicians don't want that. And during the period of construction of the new arena, there will be, at least for the period of construction, there will be construction jobs that are generated. Of course, the problem with that is if you go into debt in order to pay for the construction, then you've got to pay off that debt over time. And if no new revenue is being generated, then you'll have to cut other services, as we said before, and that means less people will be employed. But in the short run, you are generating construction jobs, and so that's usually something that is a positive for the reelection of a politician. And so, yes, they care about their legacy, but I think even more than their legacies, they care about November when they're going to be up for reelection.
So,
Good point.
speaking of legacy, what would you want your legacy to be? What values do you hope your children learn from you, or what impact do you think you've made on the community? How do you want to be remembered?
Well, with regard to my work in sports economics, I try to be a straight shooter and to provide information for people to make choices. I think there's too much that goes on in our economy and in our political system where people are purveying false information. And so and look, at the end of the day, what I care about most right now is that we learn to treat each other better as human beings, and we learn to protect the precious democracy that we've built in this country.
Amen.
Amen. So here in San Antonio,
Thank you.
we have a great number of arenas and stadiums. We have the Alamo Dome.
We're
we
making
have
it rain arenas up in here.
the AT&T Center, which is now known as the Frost Bank Center. And we have Freeman Coliseum.
Right.
And now they want to build another one. What do municipalities do with the old stadiums and
Right.
arenas?
Well, more often than not, they are knocked down. They're taken down. And then the land, again, an arena, it takes up 6, 7, 8, 9 acres of usually valuable urban real estate. And so you don't want to just keep it there for the sake of not taking it down. But sometimes the arenas find other uses. So there might be a college team that can play there, that you might be able to bring certain high school competitions there. You might be able to bring concerts to an arena. There's a variety of possibilities. Now, sometimes those possibilities won't work out because you have a brand new arena where you're going to put those events. But sometimes there's enough demand and enough activity where you can maintain the old arena. So it really depends on the particulars of the situation.
Terrific. Thank you so much for being on our show today on Talk Law Radio with Todd Marquardt and Shannon
Thank you.
Roberta Salomon Haas, San Antonio. What would your encouraging word be for the day?
I would give it back to the doctor, because we have this happening in our community right now, and people are busy. They have to go to work. Maybe they don't have time to read his entire book, although everyone should get it. It looks amazing. Is there a quick takeaway, something the average Joe can do? We're completely divided right now. Our city council is split in half. We're mimicking the national politics right now, where we've got these factions fighting. They're doing the sound bites. And what can we do to unite our community? And what's one takeaway we can do?
In
please?
2 minutes.
Yes, please. If there is one.
Well, first of all, let me say, because you've been kind enough to lift up my book and tell people to read it several times during the course of our discussion. Let me just say that that was a project I did together with Roger Knoll, an economist at Stanford University. So it's not just my work, but also Roger's. Roger is a brilliant, wonderful economist. But in terms of, look, I think that life in America today is pretty complicated. When I was in college, I lived in a world where people watched the evening news at night. It was CBS or NBC or ABC, whatever they watched, and there was a common knowledge
Yes.
that we all shared. Now, we all didn't agree with each other necessarily, but there was a common knowledge that these are the facts of the days. This was what was going on. Today, it's very hard to know what the reality is, because we got people on both sides of our very bifurcated political system that are talking about very different realities. And I think the only way to deal with that as an individual voter is to try to inform yourself by going to real sources, not just watching television or watching streaming on the internet or listening to podcasts from a right winger and a left winger, but try to find some central sources that can give you the real story and to educate yourself. we need to, for our democracy is going to flourish, if it's going to flourish, we need to have an educated voter base, an educated electorate. And that means work. It means some work. And that's my recommendation.
I think Talk Law Radio is a pretty good source of information, don't you, Shannon?
I agree with you. And amen to what you said. You're so eloquent. You also have a big thumbs up from the guy who is behind the camera, Mark. He just was fascinated with this episode, and so you have a big fan.
So thank you so much for joining us. We have to end the segment. Many thanks. I appreciate
Thanks for
you.
having me. Good luck with your decision on the arena.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah.
Each week, attorney Todd Marquardt talks about the law. His mission with the Talk Law radio show and podcast is to help you discover your legal issue blind spots. In the beginning, God had one law. Don't eat from the fruit of that tree. Then came the 10 Commandments. Now we have federal, state, and municipal lawmakers that won't stop creating new laws. Laws that might impact you without you knowing it. Listen to the show and drop a line on Facebook or email host@talklawradio.com and let the host know what you think of the show, the topics you want to hear, and whether you want to be a guest.